Trickle-down economics is a topic of much debate between politicians, economists, the media, and other economic stakeholders, including normal citizens the world over. It has received major criticisms from many and just as much praise from a few. But coming to some kind of consensus on this issue is extremely important, as the implementation of trickle-down economics into countries like the United States in the 80s may have been the most significant economic decision in the last century. A deeper look into who benefits and who suffers under a trickle-down system will also be important to gather insight into why this theory of economics is pushed so heavily by certain institutions the world over. So what is trickle-down economics? Well, firstly, two things must be understood. The output of economy, often referred to as the GDP of a nation, is actually calculated using a very simple formula. GDP equals household spending plus government spending plus investment plus net exports. A bigger GDP is always better, as it means the nation has more money circulating amongst its citizens, its government, and its firms. Now, we are economists, so for this video, all we are focused on is getting our GDP figure as high as possible. We don't care about the social or moral implications of massive inequality. We just want the output of an economy to be as high as possible, regardless of if everybody really benefits. And now, the second thing we must understand is that the term trickle-down economics is almost never called trickle-down economics by its supporters, and actually this term is usually used to criticise economic policies that take the shape of top-down wealth generation. So, with that understood, trickle-down economics is the theory that economic growth can best be achieved by encouraging business growth, and that this private sector growth will trickle down to all participants in a society. Economists describe the process of trickle-down economics as reducing taxes on businesses and normally high-income earners, reducing regulatory business restrictions such as labour and environmental laws, reducing the money supply to limit inflation, and in most cases privatising institutions that are normally government-run, things like roads and healthcare, education. The idea behind this strategy is that businesses will prosper, and as they do, they will hire more employees, pay higher wages, produce more things more efficiently, and in turn, all of this will increase household spending, investments, and net exports. Now, this in theory is good for everyone participating towards this growth. Thomas Piketty, an award-winning economist on this issue, anecdotally called this the rising tide that lifts all boats in his 2015 book, Capital in the 21st Century. Now, so far, this all actually sounds pretty great, but there is one big problem. Trickle-down economics just does not work. Here is why. When you get paid, you spend a certain amount of your paycheck and you save a certain amount. Now, the amount that you spend varies based on how financially responsible you are, but it also depends a lot on your situation. If you are not earning a lot, you are going to be spending a higher portion of your paycheck on bare essentials, rent, gas, food, and basic utilities. Let's say, for example, you are a perfectly average American with an annual savings rate of only 2.4%. That means, say you get a $1,000 tax refund one year, you're going to spend $976 of that and save the remaining $24 for a rainy day. Now, that money that you spend is going into other businesses who will pay their employees, who will again, on average, save 2.4% of that $976 that you spent. $952 is then spent again, and so on until your initial $1,000 spend has generated over $41,000 in household spending on average in the economy. This is fantastic for our economy's GDP. Now let's look at what would happen if that same amount of money went to the average member of the 1%. And yes, while the average wealthy American will spend a lot more money on things like larger houses, more cars, yachts, hired staff, and all of this does boost GDP in the form of household spending, they still spend a much lower portion of their total income. The average member of the 1% has a savings rate of 38%, meaning that given the same $1,000 tax refund, they would save $380 and spend $620. If this money recirculates the same way as it does before, that means that that money will only generate $2,630 in household spending, a stark difference from the $41,000 we were able to generate earlier by funding the average American. And yes, we do realise that rich American spending is not exclusively redirected towards other rich Americans, so the actual effect is slightly less severe. but giving tax cuts to the wealthy is still terrible policy to boost GDP through household spending. Now, quick side note, this overall effect of the initial investment being recirculated amongst an economy to produce more and more household spending is called the multiplier effect. And the poor multiplying impact of giving money to wealthy households is one of the main reasons trickle down economics just does not work. But hang on, what about investment, you might ask? Those wealthy individuals will be using their savings to invest into productive businesses, and they will be more incentivized to invest if business taxes are lower. Well, sure. So let's take a look at businesses. When businesses receive tax cuts, it stands to reason that their profit after those lower taxes will be higher. Now, profit after taxes is used for two things in business: paying out shareholders in the form of dividends or stock buybacks, or reinvesting into the business. Either of these two options will actually do good things for the economy. It normally means that share prices will rise in financial markets, and people will be able to find jobs servicing the investments of these businesses. But long term, this is unsustainable, and here's why. To produce something, economists agree that you need the factors of production. These factors of production are land, raw materials, capital, and labour. Now, we're just going to be focusing on these last two, capital and labour, for this video. Businesses invest in capital. This can take the form of machinery, offshore facilities, new, more efficient factories, fancy new artificially intelligent robots, or really anything that makes manufacturing a given good cheaper per unit. Now, labour and capital are more or less interchangeable. With new machinery, a factory can produce the same amount of cars with a few dozen workers as it used to take a team of thousands building them by hand. This still does some good, as it makes a country's exports more competitive on a global market and goods for the average household more affordable. Long term though, the impacts can be devastating. It means that employees in an economy are displaced, especially those with low skills, whose roles are easily automated or offshored. And as less and less of them are needed to produce the same amount of goods, household incomes will start to fall. This, over the long term, means less money for households to spend and less money being recirculated in the economy. Investments do go up briefly, and exports are made more competitive, but this short-term boost is overwhelmed by the decline in household spending. So, trickle-down economics just is not good for the overall wealth of an economy. Even when you ignore the social impacts of massive inequality, environmental degradation, and systemic poverty, it is still leaving the country worse off. Almost every modern economist agrees with this. So, why then do well-educated policymakers still push this fundamentally flawed idea? Given that the drawbacks of trickle-down economics in the real world massively outweigh the advantages, it would be logical to conclude that politicians and their educated advisors would no longer support economic policies with these characteristics. However, it is still seen the world over for the following reasons.